Wizard101's latest gear update is probably one of the biggest things they've done for gear in years. Y'all, today we have a crazy video covering all of the new gear sets that they just dropped in Wizard101. And the theme of all of these is that it encourages dual schooling in a way that we just have not seen. So if you guys are unfamiliar with how dual schooling for the most part has worked in Wizard101 up to this point, basically there's a secondary school on a bunch of gear that's been pushed on the Wizard since basically Lemuria, right? Even before pins, you might recall, all the life gear gave extra fire damage, but that's about it, right? If you wanted a dual school in a different direction, you really couldn't. And while pins changed how much you can customize that, themes and rings stayed being a problem, right? Because they would still only give you secondary damage to only one other school. But now, that's changed fully. They've made extra versions of every meta piece of gear. We're talking about Aeon stuff, Eternal stuff, Raid gear, Mire gear. And if there's a crafter associated with it, which, you know, for Aeon gear, this is the crafter. For the Raid gear, you go to the Raid crafter. If you go to the crafter, you'll notice that there are multiple versions of all these themes and rings. So you could have a secondary school that's way more like, you know, open than it used to be. So for example, right, let's say that you had this Aeon ring on a myth and it made you basically do ice damage as a myth if you wanted to dual school. Now you could turn it into something that actually helps you do extra fire damage. It's a one-to-one crafting recipe. If you already have the Aeon ring, there's no real reason not to craft this, because when in the world are you ever going to want to do extra ice damage versus extra fire damage? So you might be thinking, yo, are there like literally 6 other copies of every theme for every secondary school? Well, no, they didn't go that crazy. And I'm kind of thankful they didn't go that crazy, because then this would have been like a hard update to follow. Basically, the secondary damage you get, it's tied to one of 3 schools. So one that you've already had up to this point, the one that's secondary to your school, and you could also make one that's opposite to your school. So for example, right, like, you know, your main secondary as a life is fire, but you also have another secondary school identity with storm, and then you can also have a secondary school that's opposite to you, which is ice. Now, if you're wondering what I'm talking about when I'm saying things like secondary or opposite, that's valid. I feel like they've actually changed the definition of opposite in this game a lot, but basically a good way to think about it is your school will have, like, you know, spells that give utilities, and those utilities will generally lean into 3 different schools. So for life, right, you have utilities that are tied to healing because you're life, you have ties to blades because, you know, storm is blade based, and you have lots of overtimes because your other identity is overtime based like fire. The school that you have no overlap with at all is ice, which is why it's considered the opposite, and for the reasons that I just said basically about the overtimes of the blades, that's why secondary schools for life are generally storm and fire. That's probably the best way to explain it, but what's really cool is now, if you were stuck with a stupid secondary school on your theme, you no longer have to feel stuck doing that, and now there's all kinds of cool setup. Right now, I'm literally running full storm pins, and I made the new theme that gives me extra storm damage as a life. I put on a storm pet, and literally now I'm looking at stats that are nuts. I have 12,000 HP, I have 162 storm damage, 73 universal res. I'm able to heal like a life and hit like a storm, and potentially this could be like a really cool setup that could become meta. I think what my takeaway from this update really is that they're really moving heavily towards the direction of dual schooling. And dual schooling is something that I think some people are super on board with and other people like feel antsy about, which is, I think they're both valid feelings. Because once you're level 160, right, you would think at that point you would actually be able to use other schools. I feel like that's not a crazy idea. I feel like we've had that concept since like Legendary and Mastery Amulets actually came out for the first time. But I think this is the first time where, because of these theme and ring changes, I feel like the Wizard has a lot more, you know, like, you know, they have a lot more autonomy in what school they're actually going to dip into to do secondary school and dual school stuff. It's really nice because before, being forced into doing, like, you know, fire utilities on a life, it didn't really seem to work that well because there's only so much you can do with overtimes on a life. But life gets a lot of stuff that works really well with blades, so the fact that you could maybe use this update to do storm stuff on a life, it's crazy. It's amazing. What's also important to note, other than just the fact that they're moving towards dual schools, that they're adding a level of customizability more and more that I just don't think we've ever seen with stats before. I mean, the pins were a really good start. Unfortunately, I think because there weren't themes and rings that would actually like complement the jewels on and the pins and all that on the main gear, because that didn't exist, you didn't really see this. But the fact that now you could affix any, like, you know, damage pin that falls under the new themes and the secondary damage they give. And you could go, like, literally 3 different directions. It could be really cool to see what people come up with. And now, even stuff like mirror matchups, they might not be as crazy because now at least we'll be going against people that run different secondary schools, right? It won't be as basic of a game. I am wondering if they've gone as far as to give 3 different versions of an theme and 3 different versions of a ring. They give 3 different second schools. Like, are we going to see a world where we have themes and rings all the time? They give more and more. Is it going to be one day possible for you to dual school on any secondary as, like, you know, a storm or something? Is that really a direction that they're going? To me, I feel like this was a very measured step, and I feel like this makes sense. I feel like if you could make any school secondary as any other school, you could run into all kinds of weird issues where one school is just better because they have better defensive stats, and they're also better because they can use super offense, like from Storm and Fire. I feel like limiting what schools can dual school to what, even just this little, actually matters a lot in terms of making the game more enjoyable. So I think the level to which they did this makes sense to me, and I hope they actually don't go further. But maybe that's just me. I just feel like, you know, if you can make any school secondary as any other school, then you start losing school identity, and that's something that I hope they avoid, because I feel like that's a big criticism that a lot of people have with things like Archmastery, with things like dual schooling. Does the original school lose its value and its uniqueness? I will say this though, I feel like there is something super unique about a defensive school using its utilities, but using the damage per pip that's much higher from other schools to really gain that win condition in PvP. I think that's unique, and I don't think a normal life or a normal storm would ever be the same as like a life dipping into storm. And if they can get that balancing act right, you'll see games that you've never seen before. You'll see things in PvE that they can maybe do more and more. They can throw challenges at the player that we've never seen before. This type of update is a type of update that opens more doors and closes, and that's why I'm excited about this. It is worth noting that it's not just the Aeon gear that got changed. If you look at the themes and the rings and all of that, you'll notice the Nullity gear, the Void gear, they all give 3 schools of secondary damage. So what this means is there might be even more customizability than I'm showing in this video with this setup where I just have Aeon gear with storm damage, right? There might be even more customizability than you've already seen. I think the TLDR is, don't feel overwhelmed, because it basically is just the same gear, just more dual school stuff. And experiment. If you do feel overwhelmed, try to look at the gear and see if you find something you like, and see if it works in PvE or PvP. I think that's the real takeaway. You have more options right now than you've ever had with gear sets. We'll see how this whole thing unfolds, yo. I feel like it could mean a lot for PvP, so tune into the streams to see me do this setup and other things. As always, drop a like if you enjoyed, leave a sub if you're new, and if somebody hasn't told you're awesome today, they doing something. I'll see y'all soon. Stay awesome. Let me know y'all's opinions on this new gear, and yeah.